Welcome back to the DGS Presents YouTube channel, everyone. Today we're going to explore West End Games' DC Universe role-playing game, a game of high adventure featuring the greatest heroes from Gotham City, the Justice League, and more. Now, this game came out around 1999, 2000, and it utilized the D6 Legend system, which was the same system that they used in the Hercules and Xena game that I covered a few months ago by West End Games. And it was a lot of fun. It didn't get too much notice. It didn't last for very long, but they did come out with quite a few supplements and different books that you could use with the game, surprisingly, for a game that was only around really for three or 4 years before I think West End Games pretty much went bankrupt. I do have a copy here, so let's take a quick look at the actual box set. And here it is, the DC Universe role-playing game. If we open it up, let's see what's inside. We have our rule book. And most of it actually is in full color on the inside, and some of the art is actually from John Byrne himself. So it's pretty cool. The cover art isn't the greatest, but the interior art I think is really, there's some really cool interior art in here, and the layout's kind of interesting with all these kind of icons and stuff on the left and right. In addition to that, this box set also came out with a narrator screen. It's like I think it's a 4-panel narrator screen, which is pretty much everything you need. And again, the game is pretty simple, so that's not too hard. There's some character sheets here. There is a narrator's book, which features some additional heroes and villains, and also has some adventures and technology and things you can incorporate into the game. After the initial box set came out, West End Games came out with a number of supplements. For instance, the Justice League of America book, which has all the heroes of the Justice League, past and present. Here you have Green Arrow, Black Canary, going way back. Everybody needs in here. It's a pretty big book. I think it's about like a couple hundred pages in length. And they also came out with the Justice Society of America book. This is actually even a little bit bigger. I think it's like 250 pages with all the heroes from the Justice Society of America, right? You have some kind of somewhat obscure heroes like the Whip and Quicksilver. Now, after that, they came out with a few different things. For instance, the Magic Handbook. Magic Handbook has some rules for Magic, which we'll discuss in a little bit here. On the cover, obviously, is Dr. Fate. I think inside here is Zatanna. I think Ra's al Ghul is in here, and some other people. And again, rules and procedures for running a magical campaign. Another thing that came out was the directive on superpowers. And this is kind of hard to find, actually, if you go on eBay, and I think it's kind of expensive. But this had additional superpowers that could be used by heroes and villains in the game. And it was from the Department of Extra Normal Operations. So that's the directive on superpowers. And then you have these city source books. For instance, the Gotham City source book with all of Batman and Robin's villains and everything they face, but also their allies and contacts and associates. You have people from the Gotham PD in here, Commissioner Gordon, Renee Montoya, all these different people, from Gotham City. And then, of course, maps and this kind of thing, which you can utilize in the game. And then I think there's some stuff in the Batcave in here as well. Not to be outdone, of course, we can't forget about Superman, because we have our Metropolis source book For Superman, same thing, right? You have Superman's contacts, his friends, his allies, and enemies. Maps on Metropolis for running games in that environment there. And then finally, there's this little thing called the Agent Manual, which was released. And again, this was from the overview of the DC Universe's Department of Extranormal Operations. So this kind of ties into that magic source book a bit. So those are the actual physical, books and everything that came out in this line. And it was only around maybe for a few years. But as I mentioned earlier, the game itself uses this D6 legend system. And the D6 legend system nowadays is in the form of an OGL, right? Open game license, which you can basically, I think, utilize for free. I mean, you can develop things and utilize the system however you want. And the system itself, as I mentioned when I did the Hercules and Xena episode, uses a simplified version of the D6 role-playing game system, which was used by Star Wars, right? West End Games. Only this time we don't have things like pips, right? So the actual pips on the die don't really matter. What you're doing is you're rolling to generate enough successes on the dice to overcome a difficulty number of some kind, right? It might be to open a door, it might be to hack into a computer, or it might be to punch a bad guy. So, but the die system is kind of interesting because it uses this thing called Hero Dice. And the Hero Dice, if we look here, there's these dice that come in the box, right? And there's red dice and there's a black wild die. And the red dice basically have two sides, failure or success. And the first one is a dark side for failure, and of course a Superman for success. But there's also a wild die, which is a black die, which has 4 different sides on it. One of them is a Joker symbol, which is a critical failure. So let's say I roll 3 red dice and a wild die. I get 2 successes on the red, but I get a Joker on the wild die. I have to remove one of my successes. And so it's a critical failure. But maybe I get lucky, and on the wild die, I roll a Batman symbol, right? Just the bat symbol there. That gives me a critical success, which allows me to keep rolling. So I count that as success, and I keep rolling. And if I keep getting Batmans, I keep rolling. So it's an exploding die. So that is a kind of a fun system. Let me real quick here. Let me go back to see if I can bring this back in real quick. West End Games also came out with these things called JLA Hero Dice. And these are rare. I mean, these are hard to find. I'm lucky to have them in some ways. And the only thing these things were basically is they were standard hero dice, but they were hero specific. So for instance, you have Wonder Woman, her die, and let's say you're running a campaign that has Wonder Woman in it, and she has her own die. So the Wonder Woman symbol there would be a success, but the Circe symbol, if you can see that, would be a failure, right? Circe is the sorceress who's the enemy of Wonder Woman. These other dice follow the same kind of thing. We have Aquaman, right, where, the A for Aquaman is a success, right? But here we have, if you can see that, not too blurry, you have the Black Manta, and that's a failure. And then you have like, the Green Lantern, where Sinestro is a failure. And you have, I think there's a Flash where Mirror Master is like the failure. So you don't have to use these. They're just kind of fun to use in the context of the game, just to spice things up a little bit, to add a new dimension, right, to the game. So here, let me pull that out. And then, so the again, the system itself, right, used this D6 legend system, which is now an OGL form. And the basic premise here, right, is that your character, and we're going to look at one in a moment, has dice in different categories. Let's see. Let me pull up. Let's pull up Robin here. Here he is. Okay, there he is. So here we have Robin, right? So if we look at Robin, we have all the background information, his name and all this stuff, and height, weight, and all this other stuff. But we also have these attributes that are represented by dice, right? So his reflexes are like 2D, or his coordination is 2D. His physique is 3D. Then he has underneath there, and if you're creating a character, you can buy these. You have additional dice in skill areas. So, for instance, if we look at Robin here, he has, I think it's 7D in acrobatics. So he doesn't roll 2D for reflexes. He would roll 7D for an acrobatics check. Let's say he's trying to tightrope walk over 2 buildings in Gotham City, right? Or he's trying to jump off a truck. So that's what you would use. What I did is to make things somewhat easy is I created, and I'll put this in the notes for this show, is I have this DC Universe cheat sheet that I put together, which basically kind of tells you how the system works at a simplified level. And again, this is not a complicated, simple at all system. At all. I mean, you can run this with relatively young kids successfely. And I'll talk more about combat in just a second, because I want to talk about, let's see, there were skill levels. Let me pull this up to see if I can find it. Here we go. Let me add this. Okay, here we go. So we saw a minute ago you have attributes and you have skills, and they're represented by dice, and if you look at these dice values, I mean, what do they mean? If you have 2 dice in something, you're probably like a novice, right? Below average human level. But if you have like 8 dice in something, you're brilliant, considered the best on the continent. Or you have 13 dice, you might be galactically renowned among the best of several star systems, right? It's very unusual for any of the heroes or even villains, right, to have, like, let's say, over 10 dice in a given area, right? Attribute plus skill. I think in the OGL version of the D6 Legend system, I think it only goes up to like 10D, but here in this system, in the DC universe, it goes all the way up to 15, because we're dealing with super heroic characters. So if we go back to Robin, right, we look at him, he's got, we can look at all of his skills. He has quite a few. And he also has like a speed, his movement. And then we have this, what we call a passive defense value. Now, passive defense value in the game is essentially it's a combination of different factors, but it's the kind of the default die number or difficulty number that an enemy has to exceed or to meet or exceed in order to hit you. So that's your passive defense value. You also have like hero points and character points. Now, character points, whenever a player makes any roll, like an attribute, skill, damage, power, so on, he or she may want to spend a character point to increase the total. You may use 1 character point to receive an extra wild die. You also have hero points when a player feels they really need even more help, right? They may spend a hero point to double the number of dice he or she gets in that roll. The player only rolls 1 wild die, though. Okay, so that is how those character points and hero points work. You also have advantages and disadvantages, right, which may impact your skills and the things that you do in the course of the game. Now, how does how does combat work?
Pound your own.
So if we go back to the cheat sheet, I have here a pretty easy way to handle the combat. So in any combat, we first have to make an initiative roll. An initiative roll in this game is you have to make a reflexes roll, right? Again, it's just rolling the dice and determine the number of successes. And that's on page 103. Then you determine actions. They might include attacking, disarming, dodging, move, ready a weapon, use a skill or power. Now, in this game, this is one of the things I really like about this game. You do have the ability to do multiple actions. However, you will get a multi-action penalty, which is a dice or a die on your side is going to be subtracted from the skill roll, but not the damage or initiative rolls. So, for example, jumping off a balcony, charging an opponent, and punching him will be -3D on all rolls if you're doing it all in one round, basically. Speed manipulation, martial arts may allow heroes to take extra actions without penalty. Now, what about attacking? Now, attacking is, this is pretty straightforward. It is, you've already kind of suspected, I'm sure. You require a skill roll, such as a brawling or martial arts. Or if the hero is using a weapon, he or she may use their marksmanship or melee weapons. They're going to take an action against the defense total of the enemy, which equals the passive defense value or the result of a dodge, acrobatics, or parry roll plus any defensive modifiers. So, for instance, if an enemy says, okay, I see Robin coming at me, he's getting ready to karate kick me, I'm going to dodge, they can, if they have initiative to do so, they can roll a dodge check. And it is done through an acrobatics or dodge roll on page 109. And the new total that they get, right, will be the defense total that Robin has to beat to kick, to land the kick. You can also do like a parry, which is an opposed roll versus an attacker's roll. And then we have down here, I believe, is range. And range also modifies the attack. Right, so you would calculate the range even when attacking hand-to-hand. Remember this from Hercules and Xena, right? Point blank, the target receives a -1D penalty to their defense value. Short is that it's going to be between 3 and 5 feet. There's no modifier. Medium depends on weapon. Target gets a +1D to die to their defense value. And long, of course, depends on weapon as well. Typically, the target gets a +2 bonus to defense value. So, if I'm trying to, let's say, shoot my gun at an enemy at a great distance, right? The defense value of the enemy may be enhanced by 2. It's gonna be harder to hit them, which makes perfect sense, right? Let's see what else we have here. Damage. Now, what do we do for damage? The damage uses the formula, which is on this cheat sheet here, which is the base damage value of either the fist or foot or whatever if you're using martial arts, minus or the weapon, minus the armor value of the target plus any damage modifiers. So damage typically depends on the weapon or power. Someone punching or kicking has an unarmed base damage value, and you probably saw something called BDV on Robin's sheet there. This is the base damage value of how much damage he really does by punching or kicking. The brawling skill raises us up to 2D and adds the bonus of +1D for every 3D in the skill, so you have to keep track of that. Modifiers. There is something called the effect value. And the effect value is very important because it is also used in other West End game systems such as Masterbook, which we'll get to. The effect value is the difference between the skill roll and the difficulty number. It's added to the base damage value. So the better you attack, the greater your die roll, the bigger the effect value, the more damage that you do. You also get a physique or lifting bonus. So for every 2D the hero has in physique or lifting, he or she gets a +1D bonus to her damage. So you can imagine what somebody like, Wonder Woman, Superman would do, right? Because of the great strength and the damage that they can dish out. Now, there are massive damage modifiers. Receiving a large amount of damage all at once can result in shock or worse. And there is a little chart that I have there on my sheet that's taken from the book, depending how much damage you sustain. Now, a few more things. I'm not going to get too deep into these. There are combat options and specializations found on page 190 through 195 and page 52 of the book. There's things like charging, or choking, grabbing. There's all kinds of things that you can do. And in this book, there's a long list of close combat specializations with martial arts, with like grappling and kicking and doing all sorts of crazy things, which really enhance the kind of super heroic, action-packed atmosphere that this game can invoke. So your heroes definitely need to remember that and need to use those. There is another thing which we haven't mentioned yet, which is sorcery and wizardry. Now, sorcery and wizardry obviously is going to be a lot different than, for instance, like Dungeons and Dragons or something. It's a little more complex, but it's pretty straightforward. To cast a spell, if the hero has some sort of magical ability, he or she decides on the effect, which must emulate one or more specializations or aspects or uses of one or the more powers in the games. And the difficulty of the spell is the spell value. So I have a little chart here that has the spell value with the power class. Once the spell value is determined, check the modifiers for things such as combining powers or increasing the duration. All of this stuff is on page 22 of the Magic Handbook. If you have it, that one's a little tough to get. But there are some general rules in the main rule book. When it's ready to cast, you roll the hero's arcane lore, knowledge, like a sorcery or wizardry, or know-how, which is be sorcery, against the spell value in order to cast the spell. So this sounds a bit complex, but it's just different, right? So the example I have here is Dr. Fate wants to create a translucent suit of armor around himself. This would be a psychic manifestation armor emulation, which is in the mental power class and therefore has a base spell value of 4. Okay, so that's how that all works. Then you have speed manipulation, and to tell you the truth, guys, in any super heroic game such as Marvel Superheroes, or let's say DC Heroes, which is the Mayfair book, which we haven't covered yet, speed manipulation is tough, right? When you're dealing with somebody like the Flash, or let's say Quicksilver, it's so difficult because they can do so many things in the context of such a short period of time, like a combat turn or round or exchange or whatever. But there are some rules here for speed manipulation for people like the Flash, and they have to make certain rolls, like a know-how roll versus speed manipulation, and there's certain die level difficulty numbers based on how fast they want to move and what they want to do. Too detailed to all go into here, but it's one of the tougher parts of super heroic gaming is this speed manipulation or super speed situation. So let's see here. So here's here's the combat formulas that I have. Way back when I talked about the difference between a chart-based game and a formula-based game, or maybe a hybrid game, this is a formula-based game. So if we look there up at the top, we see that we're using D6 rolls to basically do the math, add them together, and hit a difficulty number or exceed it in order to get something done. So it's very different than like old school Dungeons and Dragons, where you're rolling against some big table, right, in the DMG or something like that. This is primarily formula-based game. There is an example in the rule book of combat formulas in action, which is very useful, which tells the narrator, which is the GM or DM, and the players how to handle this in the context of the game. In the books, obviously, there's lots of villains that you can face. So, for instance, here is Lex Luthor, and he's got all his stats and his background here, and then all of these different die values based on all his skills, and of course, Lex is going to have a ton of them, right? So this is an example of a page from one of the books. I think it's from the basic set or the main box set. Lex Luthor is in here, and again, there's like hundreds of heroes and villains that you can play in this game. Really, I mean, the only drawback of this game, which I was talking to Mike about earlier, is if you're dealing with really high level characters, like let's say like Wonder Woman or Martian Manhunter or Superman, you're going to be rolling a lot of dice, right? Kind of crazy with all the dice in certain circumstances. It can be right? Versus something like the DC Heroes game, which uses an exponential game system to kind of avoid that excessive die rolling. But don't let that scare you away from this game. This game is really, really fun. And like I showed you with the unboxing that I did earlier, there's all kinds of cool supplements and stuff. The artwork is really cool. Again, there's like John Byrne did some of the art. Many other people, good artists did it. I think that if I look, I guess I should get proper credit. I think that I'm going to scroll all the way to the top here. I think it's George Straighten and Nicola Vertus were the authors of this particular book. And I remember them doing some like demos and stuff at Gen Con to try to convince people to play it. Unfortunately, this is like 1999, 2000. This is when, TSR had already been taken over by WotC, and the RPG industry was kind of a mess. Everybody was playing Magic the Gathering. So it wasn't the best time to release this game. The last thing I'll tell you guys is how if you have very powerful characters like the Justice League, how do you create scenarios that will challenge them? And just as a quick example, what I did in one of my the games that I ran for a convention is I used the enemy or the villain, the Queen of Fables, who was a character from the comic books, who her power was that if she could get inside a book, all of the things that were described in the book, like in terms of power wise, became powers that she had.
Kinky.
So she could get inside something like, let's say, Grimm's Fairy Tales and do just crazy things, right? Or Alice in Wonderland, or maybe some of the C.S. Lewis books. All the stuff that were in those books was at her disposal. So in my adventure, I had her basically get inside, I think maybe it was Grimm's Fairy Tales, or maybe it was Alice in Wonderland, in the Gotham library. And then she started basically turning Gotham City into this big fairyland, right? There's all these crazy like vines growing all over everything, and the whole city is changing because of the epic power that's coming from her. So the Justice League had to go and try to deal with her, but she had this gigantic magical chessboard set up in the library. So what I did in the convention game, I wish I still had this, but it broke. I had this massive wooden chessboard that I set down, and I had these like large figurines of all the Justice League and all the enemies. So the minute that Superman or Batman or whoever stepped onto the chessboard, let's say you stepped onto the rook spot, or you stepped onto the knight spot, you were limited in your powers and your movement based on the spot you stepped in. So it kind of nerfed Superman and Flash and all these other people, and they had to fight it out on this big chessboard. And I think ultimately they trapped the Queen of Fables inside the federal tax code or something, some book that had no powers at all, and that finally dealt with her. So good example of using magic and specialized powers to try to kind of contend with heroes that are really, really powerful without bringing in somebody like, Dark Side or something into the picture. So anyway, that's what I had this week, guys. I just thought I would throw this game out here. It's a bit obscure. It's definitely a little bit off the beaten track, but it's fun, especially if you have the dice and you have good people to play with. So until next time, this is the DGS Presents and Colin signing off.